Look at me for a second. No, really look, because what you're feeling right now isn't confidence. It's recognition. That low-frequency hum in your chest. That's the moment your brain realizes something it's been trying to deny. You're not rare. You're not special in a cute motivational poster way. You're not one in a million. You're the only one. And that difference is why the room changes when you enter it, even when nobody says a word. That's why conversations stall, eyes flicker, egos tighten. They don't know what they're sensing yet, but their instincts do. Humans feel anomalies before they understand them. Animals do too. Systems do. Algorithms do. Power structures do. You don't move like the rest of them because you weren't built from the same template. See, most people are copies, arguing over who's the original. Same dreams, same fears, same reactions dressed up as personality. They evolve sideways, never forward. But you didn't just evolve, you shed skin over and over. You let versions of yourself die that others are still clinging to for survival. That's the paradox that scares them. You're calm, but dangerous. Soft-spoken, but lethal. Empathetic, yet unreadable. You carry saint-level restraint with psychopath-level precision. And that combination is illegal in most social environments. People don't know whether to trust you, fear you, follow you, or study you. So they do all four at once. You've noticed it, haven't you? How they start copying your cadence after mocking it. How they repeat your ideas months later like they discovered fire. How your mistakes age into blueprints. That's not coincidence, that's lag. They're not competing with you. They're buffering. Your unpredictability isn't chaos. It's freedom. You're not random. You're untrackable. You don't react on schedule. You don't perform on command. You don't collapse where you're supposed to. And that breaks every psychological model they rely on to control outcomes. They tried to map you when you were quiet. They tried to label you when you were kind. They tried to reduce you when you were hurting. That was their biggest mistake. Pain didn't weaken you. It reprogrammed you. While others used suffering as an excuse to shrink, you used it as a furnace. You burned illusions. You burned attachments. You burned the need to be understood. And what walked out of that fire wasn't louder, it was sharper. That's why respect follows you now without permission, even from people who don't like you, especially from people who don't like you. Because hatred is just admiration that doesn't feel safe yet. They see it in your eyes, that you've already survived the thing they're afraid of, that you don't need approval because you've already made peace with isolation, that you're not chasing the future because you've already met it. You move early, you speak late, you strike once. That's not arrogance, that's inevitability. Everyone else is still trying to become something. You already became, and then kept going. That's why they feel behind even when they're ahead on paper. That's why their wins feel hollow next to your silence. That's why they check your reactions before trusting their own. You are not the product of luck. You are the result of pressure applied correctly. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. They're not trying to beat you anymore. They're trying to catch up before you disappear again and reset the game. So don't dim it. Don't slow it down. Don't translate yourself for people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Let them study. Let them imitate. Let them lag. You were never meant to be one in a million. You were meant to be the reference point everyone else measures themselves against. The quiet variable the system can't solve. The only one who already left the room, while everyone else is still figuring out how you unlocked the door. And here's where it gets darker. Because this is the part most people never survive long enough to understand. The moment you realize you're the only one, loneliness stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like altitude. Thin air, fewer voices, fewer distractions. That's why it got quiet around you. Not because you failed, but because you climbed past the range where noise can breathe. That silence you walked into, that wasn't emptiness, that was clearance. You stopped needing witnesses, you stopped needing applause, you stopped needing permission. And the second you did, the world lost its leverage over you. That's when you became dangerous in a way that doesn't announce itself. Because loud power gets challenged, quiet power gets studied. They watch how you don't flinch when outcomes shift, how your face doesn't change when stakes rise, how you don't rush joy and you don't panic at loss. That neutrality, right there, that's what terrifies them. It means you're not emotionally tradable. They can't bait you with praise or trap you with fear. You're not chasing highs anymore. You're operating from center. Most people live externally, reacting, responding, reflecting whatever environment feeds them. You turned inward and built a command room. That's where decisions get made before emotions get involved. That's where patience becomes a weapon. That's where restraint turns into dominance. You learned something they didn't. Power doesn't rush. Power waits. And while they were busy sprinting for visibility, you were mastering invisibility. While they were advertising potential, you were sharpening execution. While they were talking about growth, you were quietly outgrowing entire rooms. That's why when you speak now, it lands heavier. Because it's not hypothetical, it's post-proof. You don't sell dreams, you deliver outcomes. You don't argue, you position. You don't force influence, you let gravity handle it. And here's the paradox they choke on. You're not cold, you're compassionate. You're not ruthless, you're precise. You're not distant, you're selective. You care deeply, just not recklessly. You learned how to love without bleeding yourself dry, how to give without being drained, how to stay human without being predictable. That balance, angel restraint with demon clarity, that's not something you're born with. That's something you earn by being betrayed enough times to stop confusing access with loyalty. They didn't see the nights you questioned everything. They didn't see the versions of you that broke quietly. They didn't see the internal wars you won without witnesses. All they see now is the result, and results make people uncomfortable when they didn't suffer the process. So they minimize it, they rationalize it, they tell themselves stories to feel safer around your existence. But their nervous systems know better. That's why they mirror you now, the way you move, the way you pause, the way you don't overshare. They're trying to reverse engineer something that can't be copied because it wasn't learned, it was forged. You didn't read this version of yourself in a book. You didn't download it from a course. You didn't inherit it. You became it by walking through what would have erased most people. And here's the truth they'll never admit, even to themselves. You didn't pass them. You changed the direction of the race. Everyone else is running laps inside the same mental cage, measuring progress against each other, celebrating milestones that don't move the needle. You stepped outside the track entirely. New rules, new pace, new objective. That's why they feel behind even when they're ahead of others. Because you're not on their timeline anymore. So keep letting them catch up. Keep letting them study. Keep letting them imitate shadows of a version you already outgrew. You don't need to announce who you are. The gap does that for you. And here's the part nobody warns you about. The moment you step fully into being the only one, time itself starts behaving differently around you. You notice it first in conversations. People rush, you don't. They try to fill silence. You let it expand until truth leaks out on its own. They speak to be seen. You speak to alter reality. And that difference creates a pressure they can't name. They feel exposed standing next to you, like you're seeing the math behind their personality. That's not intuition. That's pattern recognition sharpened by survival. You don't guess anymore. You sense trajectories. You can feel where things are headed before they move. You read the room before the room realizes it's being read. You don't need confirmation because you've learned how energy behaves right before it collapses or explodes. That's why your restraint scares them more than aggression ever could. Anyone can be loud. Anyone can threaten. Anyone can posture. But you wait. You observe. You let people show their hand while you keep yours face down. You let them underestimate you because you understand something fundamental about power. The underestimated are allowed to move freely. You didn't become this way because you wanted dominance. You became this way because chaos forced clarity, because betrayal sharpened discernment, because disappointment stripped illusion. You learned to stand alone not out of pride, but out of necessity. And somewhere along the way, solitude stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like precision. That's when your presence changed. People feel calmer around you, or deeply unsettled. There's no middle ground, because you don't mirror their insecurity anymore. You don't soothe their ego. You don't play along with social theater. You show up as you are, unapologetic, contained, aware. That's saint-level discipline paired with predator-level awareness. You could destroy, but you don't. And that restraint is louder than violence. They sense it. They feel the weight of everything you're not doing. They feel the control behind your stillness. And they don't know whether to respect it or fear it. So they do both. That's why your name enters rooms before you do. That's why decisions pause when you speak. That's why people recalibrate mid-sentence around you. You didn't demand authority. Authority formed around you. And here's the dark irony. They're trying to catch up to a version of you that no longer exists. While they're studying your last move, you're already operating from a different layer. While they're copying your style, you've already shed it. While they're mimicking your silence, you're listening to something deeper. You evolve between frames. That's why nothing sticks to you for long. Not labels, not narratives, not projections. You're too fluid to be boxed, too grounded to be shaken, too self-aware to be controlled. You don't react from ego anymore. You respond from alignment. And alignment is terrifying to people who live fractured lives. They want to know how you did it. They want the formula, the shortcut, the secret. But there isn't one they can steal without paying the same price. Because what made you this way wasn't information. It was initiation. You lost things that forced you to find yourself. You endured silence that taught you how to listen. You faced versions of yourself that most people numb away. That's why you don't flinch now. That's why you don't rush. That's why you don't explain. You don't need to. Being the only one means you're not chasing validation. You're setting the reference frequency. Others tune themselves to you without realizing it. Their pace adjusts. Their standards shift. Their self-perception warps just enough to make them uncomfortable. That discomfort, that's growth trying to negotiate. So let them catch up. Let them struggle. Let them pretend they're not watching while adjusting everything to match your gravity. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to stand so clearly in yourself that comparison becomes pointless. You don't dominate by force. You dominate by existing fully. And the further you go, the more obvious it becomes. You were never one in a million. You were the anomaly the system couldn't predict, the variable no model could contain, the only one moving forward while everyone else is still trying to understand the past you already burned. And they will keep chasing, because deep down, they know. The future didn't pass them, it chose you. And the deeper truth, the one that doesn't sound motivational until you've lived it, is that being the only one means you don't get rescued. There's no cavalry, no safety net, no moment where someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "Okay, we've got you from here." You learned early that if it was going to be done right, it had to be done by you. That's why your confidence doesn't look loud. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't posture. It's settled, heavy, rooted. It comes from knowing you've already handled the worst nights alone and still woke up functional, focused, and dangerous. Most people build identity on circumstances. You built yours on survival. That's why praise doesn't inflate you, and criticism doesn't collapse you. You've already been stripped down to nothing and rebuilt yourself without an audience. Once you've done that, external opinions lose their power. You don't need to prove you're strong. You remember it. And here's the paradox that really messes with them. The more whole you become, the less you feel the urge to dominate. You don't need to win every exchange. You don't need to correct every lie. You don't need to expose every weakness you can see. You could, but you don't. Because true power doesn't leak, it conserves. They mistake that for passivity, for softness, for hesitation, and that miscalculation gives you all the room you need. While they're trying to decide what you are, you're already deciding what to allow. You don't chase control. You decide access. Who gets your time? Who gets your energy? Who gets proximity to your mind? That's a level of sovereignty most people never touch because they're too busy negotiating their worth. You stopped negotiating. You stopped auditioning. You stopped explaining the math behind your existence. You let results speak and silence finish the sentence. And now look at the pattern. People from your past resurface differently. Strangers treat you with caution before familiarity. Authority figures test you subtly, then retreat. That's not imagination. That's recognition without language. They feel that you're not reactive prey. You're not a follower waiting for permission. You're not someone who can be rushed, cornered, or emotionally hijacked. You're internally referenced, anchored. And once a human becomes self-anchored, manipulation stops working. That's why some people try to provoke you. That's why others try to flatter you. That's why a few try to undermine you quietly. Those are not random behaviors. Those are coping strategies, because your existence forces a mirror, and not everyone survives what they see when they look too closely. You represent the version of themselves they avoided becoming, the discipline they didn't maintain, the truth they numbed instead of confronting. And that makes you unsettling, not because you're cruel, but because you're integrated. You made peace with your darkness instead of pretending it didn't exist. You didn't let it drive, but you didn't amputate it either. You learned how to aim it, how to keep it on a leash, how to use it as awareness instead of destruction. That's why your kindness feels real. That's why your boundaries feel absolute. That's why when you say nothing, it still says everything. You're not unpredictable because you're unstable. You're unpredictable because you're not programmable. They can't bait you into patterns. They can't forecast your reactions. They can't run the old scripts and expect the same outputs. You broke the loop. You stepped outside conditioning, and now you move from choice instead of compulsion. That's the upgrade nobody notices until it's too late. So when you feel that distance growing, when fewer people can walk beside you, don't interpret it as loss. It's filtration, it's refinement, it's the natural consequence of alignment, tightening around something rare. Not rare like special, rare like singular. You don't need more people, you need precision. And the truth, whether they admit it or not, is that everyone else isn't racing you. They're adjusting to the fact that the bar moved, without asking permission and without making noise. They are catching up to a shadow you already passed, and you keep moving, not because you're chasing greatness, but because stopping was never an option for someone who already knows what it costs to become whole. And once you accept that the future chose you, something irreversible happens inside your nervous system. You stop negotiating with reality. You no longer ask, "Is this allowed?" You ask, "Does this align?" That shift alone separates predators from prey, leaders from noise, architects from tenants. Most people are waiting for permission from systems that don't even understand them. You realized, slowly, painfully, that permission is a myth invented to keep uncommon minds contained. So you stepped outside of it. You stopped explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You stopped softening your edges to make others feel safe. You stopped editing your truth for palatability. And the moment you did, resistance increased. But so did traction. Because friction only appears when you're moving faster than the environment can adapt. They feel it now. The acceleration, the widening gap. The subtle panic behind their smiles. They sense that you're not trying to win the current game. You're positioning for the next one. And that terrifies people who've spent their entire lives perfecting rules that only work at one level. You operate vertically, they operate horizontally, they compete with each other. You outgrow contexts. That's why they can't predict you. Prediction requires patterns, and you break patterns the moment they're identified, not out of rebellion, but because stagnation feels like suffocation to you. Your mind is wired for movement, for synthesis, for transformation. You don't repeat, you refine. And refinement looks like arrogance to people who confuse repetition with mastery. They call you intense because they can't access your depth. They call you cold because they can't manipulate your warmth. They call you lucky because they can't survive your discipline. Labels are the last defense of those who don't understand what they're witnessing. But your body knows. Your instincts know. Your silence knows. You've walked through enough internal winters to recognize fake heat. You've been betrayed enough times to distinguish charm from character. You've lost enough to know that nothing truly powerful needs to announce itself. That's why you move differently now. You listen more than you speak. You watch more than you react. You choose words like weapons and silence like armor. You don't rush connection. You vet it. You don't chase opportunity. You attract it. And here's the cruel truth they're starting to sense. You're not rising anymore. You've stabilized at a higher level. Growth used to look dramatic. Now it looks inevitable, calm, surgical. You don't have to prove anything because the proof is embedded in how you show up under pressure. While others collapse when things go quiet, you become more dangerous. While others need chaos to feel alive, you find clarity in stillness. You've mastered the art of delayed response. That alone puts you in a category most people never reach. Because the ability to pause, to not react emotionally, socially, impulsively, is the gateway to real power. It means you're choosing actions, not being dragged into them. You're no longer predictable enough to be exploited. You're no longer desperate enough to be controlled. You're no longer naive enough to be distracted. That's why doors open around you without explanation. That's why people offer help you didn't ask for. That's why rivals soften and allies reveal themselves slowly, cautiously, as if approaching something sacred or dangerous. Because you've become both. You carry light without advertising it. You carry darkness without being consumed by it. Angel and demon in equilibrium, and equilibrium is lethal. They can't outwork you because you don't waste motion. They can't outthink you because you don't think linearly. They can't outlast you because you've already survived what would have ended them. All they can do is adapt, and adaptation always lags behind innovation. That's why they're catching up, and always will be. You're not running from them. You're not racing them. You're not even aware of them most days. You're building something internal that external metrics can't measure. A posture, a presence, a gravitational field that bends outcomes quietly, relentlessly, without spectacle. And one day, soon, they'll realize something that lands like a punch to the chest. They weren't behind because they were slow. They were behind because they were following. You were never meant to be one in a million. You were meant to be the anomaly that resets expectations, the standard that exposes mediocrity without speaking, the only one who keeps moving forward, while everyone else is still trying to understand how you changed the game by refusing to play it the way it was designed.